My name is Craig Walker. I live at 1160 Lake Avenue, and I'm a member of the city's Historic Preservation Commission. The way the permit process is being handled for these renovations shows it is a rush job designed to push this project through without proper consideration or review. The first the Historic Preservation Commission heard of it was just 3 weeks ago, a week before Christmas, calling a special joint meeting of two commissions a week before Christmas to review a project of this size and complexity, then an appeal right before New Year's when city offices have been closed for 4 days, is not conducive to transparency or due process of law. Those who wrote the city's landmark ordinance did not want quick action on projects that involve sensitive cultural resources. That is why the landmark resolution for the clubhouse says that the structure cannot be demolished, added to, altered, or moved without 12 months' notice to the Historic Preservation Commission and requires all proper permits and approvals be obtained. Why staff has allowed this project to come before the city with only 1 week of notification is beyond me. Even more troubling is that landmarking the clubhouse was a mitigation measure required of the inn by the Environmental Impact Report for the inn's 2005 expansion project. This is the second time the Ojai Valley Inn has tried to undo an agreement that mitigates the impacts of the 2005 renovation and expansion project. You might recall in 2012 they tried to undo the traffic mitigation measure requiring that they build housing for their employees. Fortunately, the council stood their ground and insisted that the inn fulfill their obligation to create employee housing. Hopefully, this will be the case here, where the inn agreed as a mitigation measure to landmark the clubhouse and to maintain it with no further alterations. What part of no further alterations to the clubhouse isn't clear? It is unfortunate that the staff report supports the inn's attempt to undo that EIR mitigation measure, and she said that, well, that was complete, but what was completed was the landmarking. Now you cannot go back and undo the landmarking and reduce the impact of the landmark later on and say, well, it's a whole new situation. That landmarking was to give them the mitigation to go ahead and do all those renovations. But also they violated the 12-month noticing requirement, and they are undoing much of the preservation and restoration work that has been done on one of Ojai's most important landmarks. The staff report runs counter to all the findings, conclusions, and recommendations of the Historic Preservation Commission. In addition, the report contains many errors and omissions that should be considered when making your own decision on this appeal. For example, we heard tonight that the standard for altering a landmark is that it significantly alters a historic resource, that it significantly makes these alterations. That may be true for a CEQA review of a non-landmark property, but that is not the case for a landmark property. The standard is whether it materially alters in an adverse manner those physical characteristics that convey the historic significance. Nothing is said in there that has to be major or significant. One glaring omission in the staff report is that it does not present in writing the recommendations, findings, and conclusions of the Historic Preservation Commission and the Planning Commission. The Historic Preservation Ordinance states, quote, "The Historic Preservation Commission's decision shall be in writing and shall state the findings of fact and reasons relied upon in reaching its decisions," unquote. These written findings should have been prepared by staff and supported by staff in its report. The staff report contains findings by city staff, by the property owners, by their paid consultant, but includes none of the findings and conclusions which led to the denial of the project by the HPC. In fact, the staff report is 180 degrees from the Commission's finding. To set the record straight, I will present some of the Commission's findings that should have formed the basis of the staff report. And I understand this is a de novo hearing, but it still would have been nice to have some of our findings and some of our work and everything presented in that staff report instead of just relying upon the staff's own interpretation. One of our findings was that the south wall of the clubhouse facing the breezeway, which is slated to be demolished, is the exterior wall of landmark number 9 as shown in historic photographs. This wall defines the exterior footprint of the clubhouse. The only difference is that the south wall now opens on to the Austin Pierpont designed breezeway instead of the original veranda. This exterior wall not only defines the boundaries of the clubhouse, it continues to support the clubhouse roof and even looks very much like it did 90 years ago. The architectural historian describes the wall as an integral part of the landmark. Why the staff report refers to it as an interior wall of no consequence is a mystery. Demolishing this wall will without doubt adversely impact the architecture and historic significance of the clubhouse. Another finding, contrary to statements and drawings presented by the project's architect, the exterior window openings on either side of the east fireplace are original, and I'll show you in a moment photographs taken in 1924, the year after it was built, that clearly show those windows there. My father was an architect, and if you had all the drawings that led up to the final product, the house, you would see that many changes are made along the way, even after the house is under construction. It could have been that Mr. Neff showed those drawings to Edward Libby, and he says, no, we don't want passageways there. We want this to be a lounge area where people can come and sit and talk. We don't know that. All we know is that the original building had windows and not doors. Our finding is that this alteration will also have an adverse impact on the landmark in both design and function, and is not allowable under the landmark agreement. Another finding that we made was that the Austin Pierpont additions, the breezeway and the dining area, are an historic resource in their own right. They were clearly identified as a potential city landmark in the 2002 EIR. Yet the proposal would involve extensive alterations to this structure, ripping up the tile and removing the breezeway along the south wall of the clubhouse. How can the council grant a categorical exemption to CEQA when the impact on the Pierpont additions have not yet even been studied or reviewed? Finding, even if a landmark could be altered, the alterations must be compatible with the architecture and historic nature of the landmark. The new open floor plan proposed for the Neff Pierpont structure is incompatible with the architecture and history of the clubhouse, and so violates the Secretary of the Interior standards. The original wood framing on the south wall will be replaced by a steel beam. The large wooden beams of the clubhouse interior will now appear to have no visible means of support. The open floor plan is more consistent with mid-century architecture, not Neff's hacienda style. The new footprint would effectively change the structure from being a self-contained lounge to being part of a much larger room, essentially a lobby for the restaurant and the bar. The architectural historian summarizes his report with this statement: "It is clear that the property was already substantially altered when it was listed as a landmark. Consequently, the proposed alterations do not appear to significantly impair the property's continued eligibility for designation as a landmark." However, the historian fails to mention, and it's not mentioned anywhere in the report, that many of these alterations were restorations, and that restorations must be preserved in the same way as original materials. I think this would be a good time to show some photographs of the clubhouse then and now, and you can decide for yourself whether the restored building is so extensively altered that the proposed changes would not affect its significance. So this is the north elevation of the Ojai Valley Country Club, designed by Wallace Neff in 1923. You can see that it looks very similar to what it looked like when it was first built. What's been added off to the far right side is Jimmy's restaurant that extends out. But other than that, when you look at that facing elevation, it looks pretty similar to the way it was when originally built. Here's a picture of the east elevation. This picture was taken and put into a sales pamphlet in 1924, the year after it was built. And their windows are clearly windows. There's not even a terrace there that a door might have come out on. You see the south wall over there on the left side with a veranda sticking out of it or extending out from it. That was the south portico. But that wall is the same wall that's there today. This is another view of the south elevation. You can see the two windows on the right side on that east elevation, and you can see the veranda coming out. And you can see that they've even just started to make a little breezeway out of it down at the far end. The picture on the left is the same one you just saw, but the picture on the right was made after the Austin Pierpont changes. You can see the breezeway coming in from the right that connected with the hacienda, the first actual hotel rooms that were built and designed by Mr. Pierpont. It extends up right underneath that veranda and goes under the veranda. So that breezeway he designed to come up and go through the area that was the veranda and connect up to the new dining area that you see over on the left side.
Could I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
The south elevation rendering with the patio in front?
Yes.
Are we looking at the openings in the south wall there?
What you see there are the pillars. See how there were the pillars?
I see the pillars, and I'm seeing openings left, center, and right.
On the left is the new dining area that Mr. Pierpont put in 1934 when he did the renovations. This is what's referred to in your packet as the Pierpont Neff additions, which was the breezeway coming over in the dining area.
On the right. I'm just trying to understand, please understand.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm not looking at the south elevation
That is the south
the Neff
elevation.
Lounge?
Yes, it is.
I am.
Yes. That patio is not the same patio that you see today, which is on the north side.
I'm sorry if I'm not being clear. I'm asking past the patio, two pillars,
Yes.
two columns, and I'm seeing what appear to be either windows or doors
Yes, windows.
on the south elevation.
Yes. And those are part of the breezeway that Mr. Pierpont put in.
That's the breezeway, not the actual south wall.
Yes, that's right.
What I wanted to be clear about.
I'm sorry, yes, the south wall is
That's
on the other side.
Behind
of the
that, okay. That's what I wanted to be clear about. Thank you.
Now, this is an interesting picture on the left because that shows the veranda that was originally there. And if you look, you actually see that the tiles are the same. Do you see the tiles on the picture taken in 1924 and the tiles that are there today on the right on the portico? This is the breezeway that Mr. Pierpont put in. And if you look on the right side of the 1924, you see there's the little L kind of pillar, and that was reconstructed there on the wall. That's the south wall of the lounge that you see on the right. And the breezeway goes down through the middle. The lower picture is a picture that's more contemporary that shows that south wall. That's the same wall that was there. It's just been renovated, and it faces now onto the breezeway instead of facing onto the veranda. This is a picture on the left looking the other way down the breezeway, down towards the hotel part. On the right is the restaurant and the bar. You have the breezeway put in by Mr. Pierpont, and on the left is the south wall that defines the southern part, the southern boundary of the Neff Lounge. There was very careful distinction between these two buildings so as to maintain the integrity of the lounge. And that's another picture of that opening on the right. The doors have been removed, but it's the same type of openings. This is a look at the interior of the lounge, looking towards the fireplace and the two windows on the east side of the building. And you can see that the current picture over on the right, except for those vinyl chairs, looks pretty similar. Even the openings on the right that go out once onto the veranda and now onto the breezeway are remarkably similar. And all of that wall helps to define the space and form of that lounge. So this is, again, just asking you to honor the design by Mr. Neff and to maintain the integrity and not to allow that wall to be torn out and merged and create a bigger space. Another finding, I'll try to be quick with this, another finding is that we did not feel that the inn had proven that they would suffer a financial hardship. There's clear regulations in the rules that state what they have to present in the way of evidence, and we didn't receive any of that, and I didn't see that in any of the report that you received as well. The 2006 landmark reports calls out the integrity of the lounge interior as contributing to the historic significance of the lounge. The inn's architectural historian discusses the interior space as part of the building's historic significance. Yet the staff report concludes that the interior design is not important to the clubhouse's landmark status. Another finding, I'm almost done, the fact that the proposed changes would not have prevented the structure from being nominated as a landmark is irrelevant. If only 10 of the arches remained in the arcade, we would probably still landmark the arcade. But that wouldn't mean that someone could come after it was landmarked with a proposal to remove all but 10 of those arches. So it's almost irrelevant once the building is landmarked to say, well, would it have been landmarked anyway if these changes had been made and it wasn't a landmark? Of course we would have landmarked it, but we wouldn't want to see anything removed. Also, prior alterations do not justify further alterations once building is landmarked. The Secretary of the Interior standards for preservation state, and I quote, "The standards for preservation require retention of the greatest amount of historic fabric along with the building's historic form, features, and detailing as they have evolved over time." Again, consider the arcade. It's undergone extensive renovations over the years. The four easterly arches weren't even there when it was built. They were added 10 years later. The 3 arches on the west end of the arcade were very much renovated long after the arcade was put up. It used to be a livery, and the whole design of those arches changed. The whole building went under extensive renovation in 1989 to bring it up to earthquake safety. And yet, none of those, I think, would justify a proponent coming in and saying they wanted to completely change it and revise it and remove arches. We would say, no, at the point it was landmarked, this is what we landmarked. And you're going to have to show that there are that wouldn't adversely affect the historic significance if those changes were made. So anyway, that's my points, and I hope you will preserve this building. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Walker. Does anybody have any questions for any of the commissioners before we move on to public comment?
I have a question.
Yes. Councilmember Weinberg.
We are, we're being asked to kind of struggle with the whole issue of appropriate adaptive reuse. It seems that's one of the questions. And Mr. McCready and Mr. Walker, I wonder if either one of you would like to volunteer what you think are appropriate guidelines for considering adaptive reuse of landmark buildings. Obviously, health and safety issues, there's pretty much no debate. If you have to have an ADA accessibility to a bathroom, you need to make a change. When it comes to the functionality of the building, could you, it's a very broad question, but I'm interested in what your feel would be appropriate guidelines for evaluating adaptive reuse. And Mr. McCready, you have extensive expertise in the area of evolving uses for landmark motels, and I'm interested in.
I would just say that in the case of the Hotel Del Coronado, there were many areas that we renovated that had to do with food and beverage, and we didn't touch any of the historic structure or elements in the hotel. And I understand the space planning issues that this applicant has with the current layout, but we can't solve their space planning issues on the back of historic preservation. It's very simple.
Thank you. I just want your opinion.
Could I just add that,
Yes,
if you
please.
go to the, down to the Riverside Inn, which is a well-preserved, one of the first examples of hotels on the Mission Revival style, they've actually embraced their history, and they've embraced the historic look of their building. And so even though it doesn't have a modern open floor plan where people can move freely throughout, they've made it an attraction of the place to emphasize that history. So I would hope that the designers of the Ojai Valley Inn could put their minds to it and come up with a way that they could preserve this hacienda-style, very historic building, not just for the inn, but for the people of Ojai and for the state of California and the country, that this is one of the first examples of Wallace Neff's work. He won an award for it. It really launched his career, the confidence that Mr. Libby had in him. It was sort of a joint effort between Mr. Libby and Mr. Neff. And I think that all that needs to be taken into consideration and not say, well, we need to have more people moving through this area, and so we have to take out walls. And that it was the mitigation for all of these changes that were made in 2005 was to create a landmark out of this room and out of this structure. And then now to say, well, that no longer meets our needs, so we don't really want it to be a landmark, or we want you to alter the landmark significantly, is just something that shouldn't be allowed, and I hope you won't.
I do have some questions for you two regarding the findings that you found, if you may. But the first question is, you referred to the guidelines established for the review of the work permit to the lounge was that the clubhouse should not be altered further. I think that's pretty clear.
Yes.
But the second part, I haven't heard any interpretation in terms of what you think that the HPC should review any proposed alteration efforts.
Well, I think that you could alter it in the sense that maybe you would restore it further. So it might be possible that the owners of a landmark that was said could say, we want to add these elements that we've discovered were in the original, and they could bring those to us and say, would you want an alteration that would return it further to what it was? And we would probably go along with that. It is possible that in the interior, because it is the interior, and by the interior I don't mean that wall which defines the exterior of the building, it's possible that they could come and say, would it be possible for us to add this wall or to put a little something here that would make it more usable to us? That's happened to us before. The owner of the Libby estate up on Foothill came and wanted to redesign a bathroom down below. And he said, would you be okay with that alteration? I mean, obviously we can't insist people have bathrooms from the 1900s. So there are some leeways that we can have, particularly on the interior of the building. So I don't see this big conflict between those two statements.
And so, as I understand, your position would be that the items listed to be protected was the exterior of the lounge, even though that's inside a building right now, that wall, it still defines that lounge.
It defines the footprint of the lounge, and they often speak in the Secretary of the Interior is about preserving the form of the building, the spatial relationships of the building, and I think that southern wall, regardless of whether it opens onto a veranda or a breezeway, is important for defining that footprint of it. And like Darwin said, it was meant to be a self-contained lounge where people came and sat and held conversations and had drinks. It wasn't meant to be a lobby for a bar.
Okay. And then furthermore, even though that wall has been altered and the TV set has been put in there and stuff like that, that doesn't, in your point of view, that doesn't really affect the status of that wall just because it was touched, there's been air vents put in there, et cetera?
Right. No, that doesn't, because you obviously have to bring up your air conditioning, your bathroom fixtures, I mean, stuff like that. We had to renovate the arcade to meet earthquake standards. And there are things like that that you do need to do and are perfectly allowable. But they do need to be reviewed to make sure that they don't harm the basic look and feel of the building.
Okay. All right, any further questions? Yes, Councilmember Haney.
Are there two types of these landmarks? And I'm just gonna, I'll say, there's a stagnant type of landmarks, and then there's a living type. Stagnant meaning, I remember when I went up and saw Fort Sumner up in Sacramento. It's a structure that is preserved, but it's not living, it's not changing, it's not growing. It's just a structure that sits up there, and you walk around this fort, and you get to envision what it was like back in the day. Whereas you have a structure here that's actually living, it's actually growing, it's changing, and if I've read it right, it's been modified 9 times already, or 8 times. So that's telling me that it's a living, breathing landmark.
Right, but some of those renovations were restorations of the building, and they were made, a lot of those changes were made back before it became a landmark. I think when it became a landmark, it takes on a little bit different status, and you have to look at it more critically than you would if it was just a historic structure. We get those all the time at our commission, where a building is a historic structure, but it's not a landmark. And we comment on it, we give the people advice on what they might want to do, but there isn't the same kind of level of protection that you have for a landmark.
So just going along with that thought, I read here, I think it was 48-05, and it's part of the HPC's responsibilities or duties. And one of them is advise and assist property owners regarding physical and financial aspects of preservation, renovations, rehabilitations, and reuse. So the question is, I'm hearing that they made an agreement in 2006 when that structure was landmarked. My question is, when it was landmarked, were there anything said to the Crown family that said what they could do in the future, what they couldn't do in the future, what we would like to see them do in the future if they did anything? Was there, I don't imagine you were there, but, and I don't know if we have that on record, but that would just be a question, is they've agreed to something, but they don't know what they agreed to. And I would think that is maybe something on us as a city, as to when we make these agreements to landmark facilities, that we're telling them what they can and can't do from this day forward.
But I think, like with any kind of planning decision that's made by city government, the applicant comes with a proposal that they want to do. We've had a couple of people that own landmarks that have come and said they want to build 6-7 foot walls around their landmarks. And there was nothing in the landmark report that said you can't build that wall, but it just is that we have to preserve the look and the feel and the historic integrity of that building. And if they come to us with a proposal to do that, then we have to evaluate it. Will that be detrimental to the historic significance of this building?
One other thing in Section I, it says develop guidelines, and this is again for the HPC, to develop specific design guidelines for alterations, construction, or removal of landmark or properties and structures within historical districts and land sites. So again, I'm just asking, do we have anything on that on record? Do we have anything to present to any future individual or entity that's going to have a facility landmarked? Do we have anything that's going to help them to understand what they're getting into, and if they do agree, what they're agreeing to?
I can't tell you about this particular building. I know that it's a large multi-purpose room. I've been in there on some days when there's been little conversation areas set up where people have been having drinks in the bar. I've been in there sometimes where they've had music playing in the bar very successfully. I was up there not too long ago, and they used it as a buffet where people would get their food and would go out onto the patio. So it's a large multi-purpose room, I think there's lots of possibilities for its use. I think that when you come and you say, we want to take out a wall and we want to take out these windows, that's a significant change, and it should be revisited by an EIR at the very least, and not just say, well, you can take out that whole wall. Or that you can change the look of it, as if you would take out all the supports for the beams. It will look like a postmodern building with these old beams going across, and then there's no visible supports. And when I was up there, I tried to imagine, I said, well, how are those beams going to be supported? Well, I asked at the commission, it wasn't anywhere in the report. At the commission meeting, they said, well, we're going to put a big steel beam across there, and that will hold it up. So I wish that you could go up there, and this wasn't such a rush job, that we could give it a sober hearing. You could go up, really take a look at it, and ask yourself, is this going to materially alter something that's an important landmark for Ojai?
Well, thank you. Does any other council member have any question? No? Oh, moving on, Don.